Hi, everyone. I think we are all here now. Welcome to this session, this breakout session, where we're going to talk about accounts payable resilience. So about adapting processes in this era of remote work. And I'm pleased everyone could join. I hope you enjoyed the last session. And just forgive me a second if I need to admit some more folks as they kind of trickle in. So maybe we'll give us just a moment to kind of get everyone settled. All right. Excellent. And if there's more here, we'll just kind of bring people in, and I won't go through introductions every time, but um, welcome everybody to this session on accounts payable resilience. So adapting AP processes in the remote era. So I hope you're able to enjoy the Tony Alvarez session. It seemed like a really outstanding session, so I was sad to pull away a little bit prematurely here to get this set up. But just by way of housekeeping today, whoops, pardon me. So this session is intended to be interactive. So everyone, even though you may be on mute right now, you have the opportunity to unmute yourself and join in the conversation. During my conversation with Tammy, who I'll introduce here shortly, I'll actually have audience questions. And so I encourage you to either chat in your responses, or please just unmute yourself and join the conversation. Again, the more interactive, the better. So I hope you enjoy our conversation today. So just to introduce myself, my name is Doug Anderson, and I'll be hosting and moderating this event today. So I'm a product marketer within Tradeshift, and I head up the Tradeshift Go product, which is a virtual card designed to basically help manage your tail spend. And it's also a solution for managing your commercial cards. And so just by way of introducing the topic today, so somewhere in the month of March, what may have seemed like a pretty normal year basically took a turn and threw us perhaps one of the biggest curveballs in history, to put it mildly. So COVID-19 changed the way we work without a lot of warning. And as a result, we've had to find new ways of doing pretty common, maybe even mundane tasks. These are tasks, of course, at work. And this transition has had to be especially challenging for AP professionals whose activities often require them to be in the office. So how do you pay suppliers on a timely basis? Do you look at changing the timing of payment? How do you interact with them now that you're working from home? And perhaps more importantly, how do you keep essential business operations moving? So today to talk with us, I'm with Tammy Johnson, who's the AP Director at First Advantage. So First Advantage is based out of Atlanta, Georgia, and provides background screening and related services for employers. Tammy is responsible for high volume disbursements, strategic planning, and ensuring that financial transactions are accurately represented for auditing. So Tammy, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Doug.
Excellent. So Tammy, at the outset of the pandemic, which now seems like, let's face it, kind of forever ago, how were your business operations impacted?
So Doug, needless to say, there was an immediate impact. First Advantage is a global organization. So with that in mind, we had to look everywhere. So in particular, my AP and vendor master teams are located in our Bangalore, India office. And because they are in a type of work environment where they don't have laptops, we had to source for that and plan for that. Which is something, of course, you don't think of.
Right.
You use your desktops and you're just kind of used to that. And there were also where we had to kind of think about our vendors and suppliers that are getting paper checks. You need to be able to be in the office and print those. And some of our locations around the world were in complete lockdown. And then there were some, like our US office, that we had essential workers that were still going to be working in the office.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so, as things began to ramp up and you began to assess the situation, what was it that really concerned you most when you looked at sort of the landscape?
Well, first and foremost, I think the safety and well-being of our associates, because although we had team members that weren't going to be in the office, we still had some that were going to have a need to go in as I mentioned, essential team members. So we had to think about PPE. And as you know, that's kind of hard to get in some cases. So we had to make sure we were sourcing that, partnering with other teams within the organization, our procurement team, to get that in so that we could have our team members make it into the office and feel protected. Things like masks, gloves, hand sanitizer. And in the past, hand sanitizer and wipes, you don't think of it,
Right.
Running out.
Yeah.
But with this need across the globe, as we said, we had to kind of plan for that.
Hmm. Can you talk maybe a little bit more about that? So, I mean, was it in actually acquiring PPE, which I'm sure maybe some others are familiar with as well? How difficult was that to procure, especially at the outset?
Well, it was quite difficult. So everybody has their little wipes or their sanitizer on their
Right.
desk that they
Yeah.
might use, but of course that runs out quickly.
Right.
So what we had to do was reach out to our normal providers, some of our suppliers that we would normally use, even in a pinch. This time
Mm.
we found that they didn't necessarily have these items. So with that, we kind of worked with our procurement team, and we kind of mentioned that we could get these items from other vendors and other sources.
Hmm.
And with that, we were able to, because we weren't set up like with terms of credit and things of that sort with some of
Right.
these newer suppliers, we were able to leverage our Tradeshift Go platform
Hmm.
and get some cards issued out to some of the team members so that they could go and find these items as quickly as possible.
Right. And so that was probably handy to have in sort of an emergency type pinch and in a scenario where
Yes,
you had new suppliers. Well,
exactly.
let's throw out a question here, and I'll put this to you, of course, Tammy, but also throw it out to those joining us. What took first priority and why when it came to creating a COVID-proof process or ensuring business continuity? What was like the biggest priority for you?
So the biggest priority was to, of course, keep the lights on. And to do that, some of our utilities and things of that sort don't accept credit cards. Very rare, but some of them don't. So we had to make sure that we were getting into the office to get them their checks, to get the
Hmm.
payments mailed out. So that was, I would say that would be one of the first and the top priorities.
Right. And I'm wondering, just from the experience of those in our audience today, what took first priority for you when you looked at COVID proofing your AP processes? Don't be shy. I will I will wait for a little bit to hear some responses here. And feel free to unmute yourself. It's just a square within the picture box. So as you see yourself, just click unmute. All right. Well, again, and if you have questions, feel free to chat them as well. And perhaps I can have one of our Tradeshift team members taking a look at those as well. Sorry, it feels like someone may have unmuted. All right, well, we will continue rolling on. Again, feel free to join us. So Tammy, let's walk through some of the change and processes that your team had to make. How has the pandemic influenced the way you pay your suppliers? You talked about sort of, the emergency scenario, and it was great that you're able to find a way, using Tradeshift Go to get the PPE that you needed. But just overall, how has the pandemic changed the way that you're paying your suppliers today?
So we still have, quite a few vendors that are accepting checks.
Hmm.
But we took this opportunity with, fortunately, or unfortunately, we had a new team member join earlier this year. So we were able to kind of get her to get our vendor master list and just kind of go through that list of vendors that did not accept credit cards or ACH.
Mm-hmm.
She was able, because she wasn't quite up to speed with her task yet, we were able to kind of let her dig into dialing and calling these suppliers and just kind of saying, hey, we've got this option for another type of pay method. So she was able to kind of get them on board with that. In the beginning, or I would say prior to COVID, sometimes you reach out to the suppliers and they aren't as easily led to use these cards, but
Mm-hmm.
at this time they weren't necessarily able to get into their office to pick up checks from the mail or receive their mail. If their buildings were shut down, they may not
Right.
have gotten things in.
Yeah.
So we were able to once again leverage the Tradeshift Go platform, get their websites, get their email addresses and things of that sort, so that we could get them paid and switched over.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, so just to kind of summarize, so it looked like initially you did some analysis to determine, okay, which suppliers here can we pay potentially in this different way, and you found that suppliers on the whole, were they willing to accept these different, payment methods?
I would say absolutely. Uh, in months past, this hasn't been, so receptive. But with this, with COVID and not being able to, kind of get out to the office as you had in the past,
Mm-hmm.
we had vendors looking for other options. We even had some reach out to us and say, "Hey, that option that you called us about a few months ago, we're interested now."
Yeah.
So, and then some of them we've even found aren't charging the fees that they've charged in the past. When you go
Oh,
to their
interesting.
website, there might have been, a fee involved. Some of them has reduced the fees, and then some have even, taken them away.
Yeah, yeah. So maybe just double clicking on that a little bit. So tell me about, and I think this is obviously a common thing with most businesses, but tell me a little bit about paper checks and, sort of the workaround there. And if you found that maybe there's less reliance on paper checks today, what's going on there?
So I would say that there is, because when you think of a check, you think of if it's not in cash within a certain amount of days, you might have to reissue it, you might have to void it. Those are steps taken, as well, and then making sure that it's backed out of your system,
Mm-hmm.
your ERP. We're able to kind of not worry about escheatment and things of that sort, unclaimed property. If people are getting a credit card or even an ACH, any type of virtual type payment or
Mm-hmm.
digitized payment, they're more inclined to go ahead and accept that payment or that transaction right away. You
Mm-hmm.
speed up the pay terms and things of that sort. You're able to get pay discounts at this time. Your cash flow might be a little different, and you're able to negotiate with the vendors. And some of them are really on board to just get that cash in the door as quickly as possible.
Right, as I'm sure a lot of us are.
Mhm.
So, Tammy, I have a question coming in from Tracy. Maybe you could. So the question is, do you think that suppliers will continue to accept virtual card payment methods and/or other payment methods once your AP department is back to capacity? Is this a short-term change, or do you think it'll actually stick?
I honestly think it will stick. This is, of course, is something new for all of us. No one's really experienced this in our lifetime.
Right.
But because we try to make sure we have business continuity plans in play, we want to make sure that we continue to look for things and resources and things of that sort to make sure we continue to get our payments in.
Mm-hmm.
So I would venture to say that a lot of them will probably continue this process. it's
Okay.
been it's been somewhat painless for them.
Right.
So I think that they would probably stick with this method of payment.
Okay. And sort of the frictionless nature of the payment change is, you think, something that's going to make continuity a strong possibility.
Right,
Okay.
right. And then planning for future, things that could occur where maybe you can't get to the office. I won't say necessarily another pandemic, but
Right.
things that may cause you, not to be able to get in the office as you need to. This
Hmm.
is definitely an option for vendors now.
Right. That makes sense. Well, so how has the pandemic changed the way that your team actually interacts with suppliers? So in other words, are you spending more time working with them? What are you seeing just in terms of, time managing or responding to supplier requests?
So I'm finding, I'm even getting more calls myself, not just my team members. I'm
Mm-hmm.
finding that the suppliers are calling prior to the payment due. So if you have 30-day terms, they might be calling now 20 to 25 days just to make sure that, hey, is that payment on the way?
Right.
Especially those who are still getting paper checks. They're making sure that, hey, that check's in the mail. Can we expect to see it? When can we expect to see it? That's more the calls and the type of volumes that I've seen around payments.
Mm-hmm. Have those volumes then overall increased? I mean, do you feel like your team is spending more time on the phone or responding to supplier inquiries?
Yes, we've definitely gotten more calls around this, and emails as well. They'll call and
Mm-hmm.
say, "Hey, here are your invoices again. If you need them." They might even send statements. Where in the past, some don't. Some organizations don't send statements. Send a statement, say, "Hey, this
Right.
is what you have outstanding. Let us know if there are any questions or if you need an invoice, things of that sort." So we're definitely in contact with them a lot more frequently than we have been in the past.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Now I'd like to hear from folks in the audience as well. Feel free to unmute yourselves and chime in. But of course, Tammy, being our expert, you're on the hot seat here permanently. What AP activity took the most effort for you to effectively accomplish in a work from home environment? So what was the most challenging activity or task that you had to maybe alter a bit due to the pandemic?
So I'll answer that, Doug. So for us, we you still get a lot of paper invoices.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a scanning system in the office. So of course we couldn't get to the office and pick up those volumes, of mail as we had in the past.
Mm.
So we had to come up with a solution. We have a digitized scanner now. So
Hmm.
yeah, once again, we use the employee that had just started with the organization. She's also able to reach out to suppliers and say, hey, here's our email address, send your invoices here. So although we
Nice.
get a lot of invoices via email,
Mm-hmm.
we were able to kind of really ramp up that effort and get more vendors on board with sending in their their invoices into email. And then the scanning is seamless. It's just a matter of, doing it in a digital format versus getting a piece of paper and sending it
Mm-hmm.
through a system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Okay.
which helps with your workflow and your output as far as approvals. The mapping is much easier, much quicker.
Right. Right. Great. Any other responses here from the audience? Feel free to use the chat, or if you'd like to unmute yourself here to chime in, please do so. All right, well, we'll keep this rolling for the time being. Again, feel free to put your comments or questions in the chat. So how has the pandemic really impacted the way that your team works to protect against fraud?
So it's funny you should mention that. We are more cautious now, of course, than ever. We have
Mm.
onshore governance because we have teams all around. So there are things that we do at the end of a week, at the end of a day. We've
Mm.
kind of ramped up those efforts just to make sure that we are not allowing anything to fall through the cracks. If there are approvals that are needed via email, with the rush to get things, paid now and make sure everybody's still kind of where we were when we left in March. We're making sure that we dot our I's and cross our T's just to continue in the effort to protect us against fraud.
Right. So is that like possibly an increase in frequency in terms of doing those activities, or do you feel like just people, your team is sort of on more a heightened alert?
I think they're more heightened alert. We have, checklists for a weekly task and monthly task. So those are still just based on reporting needs. Those things are still done in the same time frame. It's just that there's a more keen or an eagle eye, if you will, to kind of
Right.
make sure we're capturing things and protecting ourselves.
Right. And would you say that's similar to how you continue to prepare for audit and that kind of thing as well?
Definitely. We, of course, with month end coming up in a
Mm.
couple days, that's also something we've kind of added a few tasks to our list, things that we didn't necessarily check before. Like for instance, I mentioned that we are scanning virtually now, if you will, or digitized versus actually getting paper. Before, you might have been able to go back through that paper and make sure that everything has been scanned. Whereas now we've got an email that we're receiving. So the team, that's also something that's been added. So, although small, it's something that definitely, helps, that we've gotten these invoices in and we've made sure that they've, been processed in the system.
Right. Tammy, I have a question from James on chat. He's asking, how has your team adapted to the crisis on a human level? Have you had to make adjustments to the way you work as a team, or is it largely business as usual? And let me just add in a little thing there. It sounds like, this is sort of all hands on deck, right? People are putting in more effort, possibly more time in doing some of these tasks. How has your team adapted to that? How has that impacted them?
So initially, because we are not a work from home team, initially it took some getting used to. So what we did is we set up meetings, kind of touch bases earlier in the week and later in the week, so that everybody just felt comfortable. If there were any questions, things that we kind of took for granted before, we're not walking to someone's desk to hand them a piece of paper. Just to kind of get an idea of how people were adjusting to things. And so what we would do, we'd have kind of round robins, and team members that had worked from home, perhaps in other organizations, were kind of able to give some insight. Things like, make sure you step away and take your lunch if you can. Make sure you do this, make sure, things that help the team members so that we, feel engaged, but don't get overwhelmed because this is a new situation.
Right.
And, not sure in the beginning, you would think, okay, this is probably going to last a couple months or so, or just not knowing. So that's kind of made some folks feel a little uneasy. So we continue with our meetings. We have like a weekly meeting just to make sure everyone's engaged if there's any questions. And the tone of the meeting has changed a bit. In the beginning, it was like, how long do you think this will last? What do you think is going on? Whereas now it's like, hey, how are your children? How are you? Things have changed a bit. So we've gotten used to this new norm and just kind of adjusting as we needed to.
I think that human element, as we're all learning in this time, is so critical. Great question there. So here's another, I'm sorry, one other question here. So how has the pandemic changed the way that your team manages and reimburses employee expenses? So I imagine, in this work from home environment, employee expenses are probably on the rise. How has your team been able to deal with that?
Right. So actually ours is down. So our T&E travel, of course, is down.
Sure.
We haven't had really too many more expenses from our associates. Things like perhaps a cell phone bill that they expense, those smaller items we do see coming in. But one thing that we did in particular around T&E, we had people that perhaps at the end of last year or the beginning of this year kind of prepay for some of the expos and trade shows and things of that sort that they would normally be participating in. The team we printed out a vendor list of the expenses based around that. And we reached out to some of these vendors and said, hey, has this been canceled? Things that we couldn't necessarily find online. Has this been canceled? Will it be canceled? Will there be a reduction in the cost since, you don't have people necessarily coming to a big arena or what have you? So that's kind of been one of the tasks of our T&E team, because they aren't having as many things to look through because we have had a decrease in our travel.
I see. And have those individuals also sort of been reallocated to other tasks within your team then because of that reduced workload?
Yes, because initially, before we were able to get laptops to our team members in Bangalore, India, we, of course, got a backlog. So those team members being cross-trained and part of our business continuity plan, making sure we have team members that are cross-trained, we've been able to kind of put them into other slots and just kind of pick up where we've had kind of some losses in production.
Okay. All right. Awesome. So here's another audience-directed question, again, feel free to join in the chat or unmute yourself. How has adapting the way you work during the pandemic been eye-opening or surprising? So say, for example, you might have seen that there are some things before that you said, there's no way this process will ever change, right? It's written in stone, like, maybe the 10 Commandments or something. How is that, and then of course it does evolve or change. Have you been surprised by any of that?
Uh, yeah, so there have been a few things actually. One in particular, sometimes it's hard to get folks, business partners and your internal stakeholders to get on board with using a new product. We've really been trying to say, hey, we need to try to use this Tradeshift Go platform. It's something, the reporting is, works well for us. People are able to go out and request cars and things of that sort. So we've really gotten more of our internal stakeholders on board with paying our suppliers and providers in this manner. And that's really been helpful. It makes things, there's less paper, there's less, the volume is there, of course, but we're able to pull out, extract data and get reporting over to people for that they need for their month end that they might not have gotten in the past with checks that will still be outstanding. So that's kind of just been one thing in particular.
So that sounds like actually a fairly good change, overall.
Yeah.
How about from the audience? Are there things that you've had to adapt in terms of your processes that due to the pandemic that have been eye-opening or a little surprising to you? Again, feel free to use the chat or unmute yourself. Okay, we'll continue on. So Tammy, we're nearing the end here of our session. We have another few minutes. So what future trends do you think we'll see in the way that AP works as a result of COVID-19? We talked about this a little bit, but maybe double click on that. What things do you think will stay now forever changed?
Well, yeah, some future trends, I think we'll see a lot more digital workflows, perhaps mobile approvals, things, people's Wi-Fi might be down, the cell phone's always working, mobile approvals, digital payments for sure, virtual credit card payments with the rich remittance details, cashback rebate opportunity, things like that are definitely gonna be, I would say, the new trend. T&E is down, like I mentioned. So I would say in the near future, things like trade shows and expos might not be something where we go and get 10 to 15,000 people perhaps in a hall. Those things will change. So with that, there might be an opportunity to save there. That's kind of what I see, the trend.
Okay. And now if you're an AP pro who's concerned about the future, what advice would you share with him or her? So, the way you've worked has just radically changed to some degree, as it has for a lot of us. But, what advice would you give to that AP pro who's concerned about the future?
I would say just as simple as have a plan A, B, and C, everything now. Business continuity plan, make sure you have one, make sure you test it. Sometimes you have something you keep, you might update it, but you don't necessarily test it. So make sure that your business continuity plan is up to date. You're testing it. It could be something as simple as one team member saying, hey, calling them in the morning, hey, don't bother coming in today, work from home. And just see if things are still, up to where they need to be, if they're able to function. And with that, you need to leverage digital B2B solutions. That's something that I can't say enough about. And then also partner with your technology team. Even though we might have had a business continuity plan, if we didn't partner with IT to say, hey, we need laptops for these team members who don't have them, things would not have worked, as well as they have. And I would say once we get kind of on the other side of COVID, we need to make sure we kind of on our project list have an end-to-end automation up and going. That's something that's very important.
Absolutely. Well, Tammy, I appreciate your time today. Certainly there was lots of good things to take away. I hope our attendees were able to get some new insight based on your experience that they can take with them. And I just want to remind everybody that next week Paradigm Shift rolls on. I believe it's week 4, and want to announce exciting speaker that we have on tap, Aaron Dignan, who is the founder of The Ready, which is an organization dedicated to helping other businesses prepare for the future of work. So Aaron is a speaker, a thinker. He's an author of a new book entitled Brave New Work. So I hope you have the opportunity to check that out. I appreciate your attendance today. And so from all of us, we hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for attending.
Thanks.
Thanks, Tammy.
Bye, everybody.